In this video, we're going to dive into attention capital markets and the two top teams building in the space, which are Cookie and Kaito. So what is attention capital markets, or ACM, and how did it get its start? The start of ACM was actually this term called infofi, which was coined by Kaito. So Kaito built a platform where you would get rewarded based on discussing or talking about projects on X, right? So the whole idea was, instead of projects normally just paying KOLs directly to talk about them, the idea was that they could go to Kaito, set up this leaderboard, and then people would go and talk about it and get paid out. And based on how much actual traction or shares / comments their socials got, right? So the whole idea was they're trying to use this algorithmic listening tool to figure out who deserves more rewards, right? So they started out with airdrops for pre-TG campaigns, as well as leaderboards for post-TG campaigns, where people could get paid out in tokens or USDC, etc. Now, while they were building this, what they kind of realized is a lot of these KOLs were essentially farming these drops, but they had no real alignment with the project. They would just dump these tokens, and once it was done, they would stop talking about it. And that's where they came up with this idea of attention capital markets. Sorry, Cookie might have actually coined the term first. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I saw Cookie talk about it first. But then Kaito also started launching their ACM product, which is their Kaito launchpad. With ACM, the whole idea is you're fixing a lot of these issues around infofi by actually rewarding people based on them putting in capital. So putting money where their mouth is. The whole idea here is that talking about a project, you also are able to get larger allocation at preferable terms to invest in it. Now, Cookie's partnered up with Legion on it, while Kaito's built an end-to-end solution. So there are two main platforms, right? So the first is Kaito. Kaito's launchpad is essentially, they have very clear metrics. They show you the amount that they're raising, basically allocation that's already been requested by the community. So for example, with Billions, they actually changed the term deals quite a bit. It was 200 million with a very long vesting schedule. They changed that to fully unlocked at TGE. And now they've gotten much more allocation requested, right? If you look at Theorek, which is a much harder product, they're an AI team. Their valuations at 75 million, fully unlocked at TGE. But they've had something like a 25x oversubscription, right? So people clearly very bullish on Theorek. Then the last one is Espresso, which has a pretty awful vesting schedule. You can see it was barely oversubscribed, probably their own investors, 400 million FDV. So this one was kind of a failed. I mean, I think it's still successfully raised, but it didn't look good for Kaito. So with Theorek, for example, they are 25 times oversubscribed. So basically being on the Kaito leaderboard here, there are like a few different ways you can get in, but being on the Kaito leaderboard for Theorek, you are able to get a larger allocation, right? So that's kind of a quick intro to how Kaito works. So with Cookie, their mechanism is you essentially are able to get the C-snap status where you commit capital to essentially get bigger rewards and also invest at preferable terms. So with C-snaps, you can get it in 3 ways for Almanac specifically. So the first is you contribute to Almanac's TVL. So I'm eligible because I have capital inside Almanac. You join an upcoming public sale. So for example, if you get in through their Legion sale, you also get designated as a C-snapper, or you stake Cookie at diamond tier as well, right? And then you can see the leaderboard here to see who the biggest contributors and people are, right? So a couple key points here. So with Cookie, they're not actually an end-to-end solution. They partnered with Legion on it. And with Kaito, they are an end-to-end solution. So they handle the KYC, etc. So Cookie is more so leveraging their infofi solutions to partner up with Legion, and then they essentially have this kind of synergistic relationship. While Kaito, you could argue, is basically end-to-end, they own more of the stack. You could theoretically say that Kaito gets a lot more utility out of it. Now let's dive a bit deeper into C-snaps. There's some very interesting mechanisms at play. The first is that with Almanac, you essentially have this airdrop, which is 0.5% of token supply. Let's say they launch at 100 million FDV, that roughly could come out to 500,000. So prior to their attention capital markets initiatives, this would be distributed based on snaps, right? So snaps is their version of yaps, which is basically how much you're talking about the project and how much virality or how good the content is, right? So with snaps, prior to that, all of that reward supply would go to that, as well as a certain amount would go to Cookie stakers as well. Now, in this case, of the amount that's actually going towards this pool, 80% is going to C snaps and then 20% to snaps. So the whole idea here is that you're not just basically basically talking to get allocation, right? It's kind of works both ways, where if you are influential and talk about Almanac, you will probably get an airdrop. But then also if you invest in Almanac, that airdrops gets supercharged, right? Or if you're a cookie diamond staker. And on the other hand, if you also are a loud talker about it, let's say you put in some money into Almanac's protocol, now you're a C-snapper, and now you're also loud about it, you also get to invest in Almanac at preferable terms. So the preferable terms are the top 50 C-snappers are able to go in at a 75 million FTV with 100% unlocked, which is quite a bit lower than 90 million FTV, which everybody else gets. And also, I believe, I'm not sure about the Legion sale, but from what I understand, they basically get a full unlock on the cookie version of it if you're eligible to essentially invest, right? So it sounds like you get better deal terms and shorter lockups as well. And then the top 25 snappers also get to invest at this valuation. So basically being a C-snapper means that more C-snappers get to invest as compared to snappers. So it just makes sense to be a C-snapper and go and find a way to allocate capital into Almanac or be a cookie staker, etc. Now with Cookie and Their platform, they have 0.5% allocated for the airdrop. It's actually unclear what the allocation is for snappers and C-snappers, right? The top 75 people. And that's kind of an issue in my mind because it's like, okay, if it's a $500 allocation, it's really not that valuable. So I think more transparency on that would be appreciated from the Cookie team. Now let's talk about Theorek, right? So Theorek also has a pretty interesting mechanism. The actual way you're chosen and your allocation, right? Because there's 78 million in capital that was basically allocated, but only 3 million that's given, right? So there's a 25 times oversubscription. So the way they decide how much you get to invest is based on a bunch of factors. So these factors are based on social reputation, probably your yaps and how much you're yapping about the project, your on-chain reputation as well. So what your holdings are, how long you hold them, historical alignment and relevance to the project, which I'm not sure what that means, but probably means people who've been talking about it for a longer time, region, conviction. So basically it's very vague what the actual criteria is for the investing model. Now, what's cool about Theorek as well is 6 million tokens, which is, I believe, 0.6% of supplies also are being airdropped to the top yappers from what I understand. So they also have an airdrop campaign. So with both Almanac and Theorek, you have that. However, with, for example, Espresso, I don't think there was an airdrop campaign at all. So honestly, if you're yapping about Espresso, you're getting nothing out of it really, other than getting to invest in an overinflated FTV. So that one, I can see why I didn't do that well. With Billions as well, I don't see a leaderboard for that. Maybe that changes. But again, it seems like Theorek's doing both the airdrop as well as the sale, which kind of double incentivizes people. I think that's the smarter move. So you can see the differences between the two platforms. I would say both of them are quite solid. I would say like Cookie seems to be focusing more on ensuring that their snappers and people who are on their platform actually get a lot of utility out of it. While with the Kaito launchpad, it seems like they've had a couple of lower quality deals come in. I know they updated the Billions deal, but it seems like Cookie only had one deal, but that one deal is like really, really solid. So it feels like Cookie's going for a slightly more curated approach, but it's super early, hard to know which launchpad's going to do better. Honestly, if you are on crypto Twitter, you're influential, you talk a lot about these kind of things, you should definitely be using both platforms and exploring them, right? So let's quickly talk about issues with attention, capital markets, and infofi. The first is that you do get a lot of low quality content being rewarded, right? So for example, Wohair basically says infofi is pretty bad for crypto because it just leads to a lot of low quality content. The founder of Infinix also mentioned that most of their yappers were just low quality AI slop. So if you look at the top voices for Almanac, for example, this profile here, Justice. So let's look at this profile, right? So with Almanac, and he's also farming multiple protocols. You can kind of tell it's quite AI generated. Some of these are better than others, but I think this is, this one, for example, it feels like a pretty AI generated kind of piece of content. And then there's a bunch of like profiles that I've never seen that are also engaging on it. So it feels like quite botted and quite like unnatural, right? So that is something for example, I asked the Cookie team how they're going to solve it. They said they're working on an update on content. I think this is going to be an issue overall, is how do you keep AI slop and low quality content? My personal thoughts on this is not something that's going to be completely easy to just algorithmically get rid of. I think you can have that first pass through algorithms to figure out who's lower quality and who's not. However, you're going to need a second layer of, let's say, manual manual overview as well to make sure your tokens aren't going to AI slop creators, right? A couple ideas I had on this, right? And again, I could be wrong, I could be right. If you would like to give me feedback on them, I would love it. But my first idea is let project / content they think is low quality. It doesn't have to be 100% slash, it could be a 90% slash. So for example, if you would get a certain amount of tokens, maybe you get like 10% of that because your content is determined by the project to be low quality. Ultimately, the project's other customers, right? So I think this is completely fine. Like there's no need to make this into a completely automated, decentralized system. It's ultimately a marketing service that's being provided. So the project should get value out of it. The second one is having a minimum smart follower count. So this is something I think is really important, right? Because like you look at some of these guys and their smart follower counts are like very, very low. It doesn't really make sense to me, right, to reward those guys. If they have a smart follower count of like 20 people, usually means that their account is kind of botted, right? So for example, I'm not the biggest crypto Twitter person. I barely am on there, but I have like a couple hundred smart followers. So it shouldn't be that hard for some of these bigger KOLs to have at least like 100. I think the other one is potentially having some sort of mechanism where you have people lock in something. So I think with Cookie, what they're doing with C-Snappers, that's that mechanism of having them lock up capital or invest in a protocol to be able to get those rewards. I think that does a good job on a first level, but then also if you are running one of these farms, it's not that big of a deal to lock up $1,000. So I don't know how effective that'll be. Having some sort of prove your bags mechanism, right? Which basically could be like, for example, let's say you talk about a certain token, but you also hold it, then it kind of like gives you more credibility. So looking at your history of all the tokens you talk about, and if you don't hold them, then usually it's like a sign that, okay, maybe this person's not actually a believer in this token, right? So that could be another way as well. But yeah, overall, I think these launchpads based on social activity, they are an interesting innovation. I would say to projects, like, don't just blindly run into it. I've noticed a trend where teams and projects are like, oh yeah, we don't need a marketing team or we don't need marketers. We're just gonna go do this Kaito or Cookie thing. And it's like, yeah, it's a good tool in the toolkit, but you really need to think about it strategically and make sure you do it the right way. And then also make sure you have ways to engage people past, let's say, that campaign finishing up, right? So you do still need that like level of strategy and thinking about it because it's a very evolving field. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was brought to you by Crescendo, my go-to-market agency. We work with a lot of top AI, DeepIn, and gaming teams. If you'd like a free marketing consultation, feel free to hit me up. And if not, please make sure to like this video if you see it on X. Go give it a subscribe on YouTube, or yeah, if you see it on LinkedIn, give it a like as well. I'll see you in the next video.